Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really gripping 1990 Irish High Court case, Connolly versus Dundalk UDC. This is one of those cases that starts with a terrifying workplace accident and just spirals. It turns into a massive legal thriller about catastrophic engineering failures, super strict safety laws, and how just one seemingly normal morning completely turned a family's life upside down. So, to really grasp the weight of this case, we've got to start with a pretty heavy question. Who pays the price when a routine morning at work literally destroys a man's mind? I mean, how does a minor physical accident at a local waterworks facility end up permanently shattering an ordinary happy guy's entire personality? Keep that in the back of your mind as we walk through exactly what happened and the massive legal fallout that came next.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's the morning of January 8th, 1986. We're at the Castletown Mount Waterworks in Dundalk, Ireland. Michael Connolly, an assistant caretaker, pulls up on his motorcycle, just like he does every other day. He's nearly 50 years old, a married father of 5. He'd actually spent 16 years working over in England before coming back home. By all accounts, he's a really pleasant, outgoing guy, a solid family man who loves his football matches and hanging out with friends. And his routine that morning? Totally simple. Just open up the closed water purification building. So he unlocks the main door and makes his way along the ground floor, heading toward the chlorine room at the far end of the facility. But the second he opens the internal door to the Mahan building, boom, he is instantly hit by this dense, totally suffocating cloud of chlorine gas. Naturally, he panics, taking in these toxic fumes, but he somehow, barely, manages to stumble back to a different part of the building. He manages to dial his supervisor, Jim Clark, on the phone and then completely flees outside. When Jim Clark gets there, he finds Connolly in absolute distress and immediately rushes him to the local hospital. The physical symptoms right off the bat are terrifying. His heart rate is pounding at 100 beats per minute, which is about 30 beats way above normal. He's got terribly low blood oxygen. His eyes and mouth are swelling up. And he quickly develops this nasty cough, bringing up green, infected sputum. They end up transferring him to the Mater Hospital in Dublin under the care of a Dr. Brendan Kehoe. And there, things get weirder. He develops this mysteriously high blood pressure that requires weeks of continuous round-the-clock oxygen therapy and heavy medication.
But here is where we run into a really bizarre medical mystery. Physically, his recovery was actually really fast. His lungs healed up within a matter of weeks, his x-rays came back totally clear, and his blood pressure went right back to normal by the time he was discharged. But mentally, well, it was a completely different story. While his body bounced back, his mind just completely deteriorated. When Dr. Kehoe checked up on him later, he found an unbelievable change. Connolly was profoundly depressed, he was aggressive, completely unable to communicate, and had become totally 100% dependent on his wife for his most basic everyday needs.
And that brings us to this incredibly powerful quote from Judge O'Hanlon, the judge presiding over the case. Now, he pointed out that courts usually have to look at claims of permanent psychiatric damage from minor physical injuries with, a grain of salt. But in this courtroom, the judge saw Connolly's genuine incoherence right there in the witness box. It was undeniable. Even the defense's own hired psychiatrist, Dr. John Ryan, had to admit there was virtually zero hope for improvement. The judge concluded, with just absolute tragedy, that the plaintiff's personality and lifestyle had been permanently shattered.
Right. So the million-dollar question we have to ask ourselves next is, what on earth failed in that chlorine room to cause this catastrophic leak? When Connolly's supervisor, Jim Clark, finally strapped on a respirator and went into the building that day, he had to play detective to figure out where all that deadly gas was pouring from. And what Clark found was, honestly, mind-boggling. It was this shockingly crude pipe setup. You had highly pressurized, chlorine-treated water flowing out of a rigid plastic pipe. And that rigid pipe was, literally, just shoved into a flexible 1-inch white plastic pipe. This makeshift ticking time bomb of a joint was supposedly held together by a totally loose metal Jubilee clip. And to make matters worse, that flexible pipe was then bent sharply at a 90-degree angle straight down into a floor sump. So right before Connolly walked in, that unsecured clip had just completely popped off. Treated water was gushing onto the floor at gallons per minute, filling the room with a lethal cloud of chlorine gas. To wrap your head around just how negligent the setup was,
Listen to what the expert consulting engineer Joseph O'Neill told the court. He flat out testified that this kind of joint was completely unacceptable for carrying pressurized chemically treated water. I mean, forcing rigid plastic into flexible plastic without proper securing mechanics, it was practically guaranteed to blow off under pressure. He told the court that a system like this absolutely required a threaded screw connection or a proper gasket, not some cheap loose metal clip that didn't even fit in the first place.
Now, this is where the timeline gets incredibly frustrating. Modern safety upgrades were actually already in the works. Back in August of 1985, a visiting service engineer explicitly said, "Hey, you need extractor fans and fume detectors in here." And the Urban District Council, the UDC, actually listened. Their engineer went to safety courses in October and November, requested quotes, and by December 6th, the order for the alarms was officially placed. But the accident, it happened on January 8th, literally just weeks before these critical life-saving systems were going to be installed. Talk about terrible timing. So this glaring mechanical failure kicks off our legal battle, pinning the blame between two major heavyweights. On one side, we've got Dundalk UDC, Michael Connolly's actual employer. And on the flip side, we've got Mahone and McPhillips, the expert contractors. These were the guys who designed and built the water treatment plant way back in 1968, and they were the ones paid to come out 3 times a year to service the equipment. Naturally, Dundalk UDC tried to wash their hands of it. They pointed the finger straight at the expert contractors, basically saying, "Look, we hired the best of the best, so if the plant was unsafe, that's entirely on them." But the judge was having absolutely none of it. He brought down a vital legal precedent from a case called Payne v. Colne Valley, which establishes something called a non-delegatable duty of care. What does that mean for us? It means an employer owes a direct, unbreakable duty to provide a safe workplace for their staff. You can't just pass the buck by hiring an outside contractor. The responsibility stops with the employer. But wait, the contractors, Mahone and McPhillips, definitely didn't get off scot-free either. The judge found them negligent too. Think about it. Their service engineer was physically there in August and December of 1985, and somehow totally failed to warn anyone about that glaringly obvious, dangerous pipe joint. Plus, as the supposed experts who built the place, they completely dragged their feet on warning the UDC about modern safety standards. At the same time, the UDC's own staff should have spotted that dangerous joint themselves, and they were way too slow in getting those safety alarms actually installed. So, because both of these parties dropped the ball so spectacularly, the judge ruled a strict 50-50 liability split. 50% of the blame went to Dundalk UDC as the employer, and 50% went to Mahone and McPhillips as the expert contractors. And this is a huge point. The judge completely exonerated Michael Connolly. There was absolutely zero contributory negligence on his part. Zero. He literally just walked into a trap that neither his boss nor the contractor had bothered to fix. Let's talk about the damages, because the numbers here really reflect the sheer devastation of this man's life. The court calculated his wages as a grade 3 caretaker, which was just over £145 a week at the time, and awarded massive compensation for both past and future lost earnings. When you add in the general damages for his unimaginable suffering, plus the medical bills, the grand total eclipsed £280,000. For the year 1990, that was a massive, highly significant financial ruling. But the judge realized something deeply heartbreaking about all that money. He noted on the record that no amount of cash, no matter how huge, was ever going to give Connolly his life back. Because he was left entirely incapable of managing his own affairs, the judge had to issue a tragic final order. £260,000 of that money was sent straight into the court to be invested, pending an application to make Connolly a ward of the court. He couldn't even manage the compensation payout for his own ruined life. Which leaves us with this final, really sobering thought. When a workplace completely fails in its fundamental duty to keep its people safe, can any amount of financial compensation ever actually repair a shattered life? A loose, cheap metal clip and a delayed safety alarm didn't just cause a bad smell. They entirely erased a man's personality, leaving his family to essentially care for a stranger. It is a haunting reminder of exactly why workplace safety laws and the strict liabilities that back them up are absolutely vital. Something to think about the next time you walk into work. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.